artificial intelligence, or AI. We hear about this buzzword a lot in the media, and we hear of its huge potential. And yet, some of the greatest thinkers and businessmen of our time are saying that this technology could be one of the biggest risks to humanity. But it seems like a pretty big jump to go from the huge prospects of intelligence and automation to the scientific realms of robots taking over. So, what's our future with artificial intelligence, and will it be for good or ill? Well, let's start with where we are now. Artificial intelligence is in a huge number of areas already, and a lot of the general public might not know this, but you as engineers, I'm sure, are aware. Commercially, we've progressed very quickly from sort of email spam filters in the 90s to now, say, where we have driverless cars that can sense and perceive the world, and digital assistants that can communicate with us, understand us, and even in sometimes imitate us. So if we take, for example, Siri a few years ago, compare that then to where we are now with the Google Assistant, what I'm about to show you is a real-life example of the Google Assistant making a booking for a haircut for you in the background whilst your phone's in your pocket. Okay, that's not working. Essentially what this is doing is it shows the Google Assistant calling up a hairdresser, and it is very, very good at imitating. So at this point, I think it's important to define what researchers term as the different types of AI. So firstly, we have narrow intelligence, or otherwise known as weak AI. And this is intelligence that specializes in one particular area. Then we have general intelligence, and anything beyond this is known as strong artificial intelligence. Now, general level is what we would consider a machine that can perform any intellectual task that a human can. And then superintelligence is then a machine that can perform any task much better than any human brain we know in all areas, including general knowledge and scientific creativity. Now, we are very much within the realms of narrow intelligence currently, but the difference between this and the hypothetical strong AI is that the strong AI would be able to perform any task without human interaction. And it would be able to do this because it contains already all the knowledge that we as humans might take for granted, and what at the moment has to be programmed physically by AI developers as what's known as prior knowledge. But this whole idea of there potentially being a superintelligence or an intelligence greater than ours probably makes us feel a bit uncomfortable, right? Because we know that our intelligence essentially allows us to have control over our environment and other species. So AI is clearly getting better by leaps and bounds, but what's to say that we're ever going to get to this level of strong artificial intelligence? Well, I'm going to propose that based on 3 assumptions, we are headed for a world where artificial intelligence will become smarter than us. The first of these is that intelligence is just a product of information processing. Second, we will continue to develop our intelligent machines. And finally, that we as humans don't sit at the peak level of intelligence. Now these are really important, so we're going to delve into them in a little bit more detail. So intelligence is just a product of information processing. Now I'm not talking about consciousness or morality here, and in fact we don't as a scientific community really know what causes consciousness yet. What's important is competence, and a human's ability to think intelligently through category building, through language learning, and through visual processing is all due to our way of processing information of physical systems. And we already have artificial intelligence that can outperform humans in very specific areas. For example, AI is already outperforming doctors at diagnosing tumours in brain scans. And we also know that it's possible to think flexibly across lots of different domains because each and every one of us has a brain that does it. So the second assumption was that we will continue to develop our intelligent machines if we're at all able to. So what are the motivations behind this? Well, firstly, there is huge value in artificial intelligence. as I said, it's already becoming a big part of the present, and with the data that Amy was talking about becoming increasingly big part of what corporations use, it's likely to become, in fact, the dominant technology of the future. And corporations have known this for some time. In fact, spending on AI this year is forecast to be $35.8 billion, and that's a 44% increase from last year. And with technology in general, just for a second, imagine a world where we don't get the next best iPhone the following year. It's just not unheard of. Our technology just keeps improving year on year, and we expect that. Like, what shockingly bad event would have to happen for us not to see this and continue to happen? A nuclear meltdown, an asteroid impact, Donald Trump becoming President of the United States? Well, speaking of Trump, the largest corporations may have known about the capabilities of AI for some time, but the world's superpowers are now waking up to this fact as well. And we've seen from the past that if there's a technology that would enable a superpower to have a really dominant position over the other superpowers, then we'll see an arms race to get it. We saw it in the Cold War with nuclear warheads. And artificial general intelligence would certainly prove a pretty unfair advantage in the wrong hands. Now, this graph actually shows the number of AI papers by different sectors in China. And we can see here that clearly the Chinese government are pretty interested in this technology. Now, the final assumption is what makes our intuition around this whole area so unreliable. And it's the fact that humans don't sit at the peak level of intelligence. So when we normally think about intelligence, we kind of look around and compare ourselves to the people around us. So we might say right at the bottom is the village idiot, and right up here we have an Einstein level. And we might put ourselves somewhere in the middle, or if we're being generous on an afternoon, somewhere up here. But the point is that we see the very smartest humans as much, much smarter than the dumbest ones. But actually, if we zoom out, then we see that we actually only occupy a very small band of intelligence. And in fact, due to the nature of physics, we actually sit nowhere near the realms of what's physically possible. In fact, even at human level, a general intelligence or a machine intelligence would display huge advantages over humans. To name a few, in speed, our brain's neurons max out at 200 hertz, whereas today's microprocessors are more like 2 gigahertz, which is 10 million times faster. And in internal communication speeds, the brain's synapses work at more like 120 meters per second, whereas obviously in computers we're talking about near percentages of the speed of light. So let's just stretch the imagination here for a second. Well, what's possible with one human is obviously multiplied a lot by, say, 1,000 humans. A lot of the greatest things we've done as a humanity have come down to our collective effort, say, putting the man on the moon or sequencing the human genome. But actually, computers are better at us at collective capability. All it takes is for them to copy their software to another machine, and then it doesn't require a meeting for them to connect the dots and understand what's going on between them. They can immediately understand it all. And so let's take this for any sensory input, say reading. If we combined a whole load of supercomputers to understand books in parallel, we could take all of the books that humanity has ever published, and very quickly this could build up a much better understanding of humanity and our world than we ever could. And we're now talking about an intelligence far, far greater than our own. Let's just take a step back for a second, because that got a bit crazy. So let's just remind ourselves of what those 3 assumptions were, that we're headed for a world where we will have intelligence greater than ours. Firstly, that intelligence is essentially just a product of information processing. Secondly, that we will continue to develop our intelligent machines if we are at all able to. And finally, humans don't sit at the peak of intelligence, or for that matter, anywhere near it. So the next obvious question you might be asking is, well, when might this happen? And for a moment, I want you to consider sort of our human condition to think in very straight lines. We tend to say, well, this amount of innovation and technology happened last year, so I guess we can assume that the same amount is going to happen the following year. But then we tend to extrapolate this to years, if not decades. And so now we're talking about oh, well, this happened over the last 50 years, so we can assume the same will happen over the next 50 years. But actually, this isn't true, and if we zoom out, we've seen absolutely unprecedented levels of growth in human advancement in the last decade. And in fact, in many areas, we see it as exponential. In a very important area for artificial intelligence, we could say is computer processing and computing power. And Moore's law, for those of you who don't know, predicted that the number of transistors that you could fit on a microchip would double every 2 years. And we've actually seen that this is the case. And with the prospect of quantum computing, seemingly in the near future, as Ben will be talking about, this doesn't seem to be slowing down. So if we combine this likelihood of us getting to this general intelligence with the seemingly exponential growth of humans, then it suddenly becomes quite relevant to us. Now, I want to emphasize the fact that researchers really don't know when we might get to this level of general intelligence. But to give you an idea, in a thorough survey of 550 of the top AI researchers, they gave the answer of a 50-50 likelihood of it happening by 2040 and a 90% likelihood of it happening by 2075. So this could be within the realms of our lifetime. So, hopefully I've persuaded you that this could happen. Now I want to show you why this could either be really, really good or really bad. So researchers are pretty certain that if we get to this level of general intelligence, then it's going to be by some form of self-improvement algorithms. And that's because it's clearly going to be very difficult. So developing AI that builds better AI is a very good way of doing that. And Google are already doing this. They're using a technique called reinforcement learning to find the best architectures for some of the hardest AI problems like image learning and speech recognition. So if we're going to reach this level of general intelligence using these self-improvement algorithms, then what we need to consider is that even though human-level intelligence might be an important milestone to us, there's no reason that a machine would stop at that level. In fact, it's likely that it would only be at that point for a small fraction of for a small amount of time before progressing way beyond it. So we could see ourselves in the position where it may take decades for us to reach a low level of intelligence, say that of a 4-year-old. But now it's working on itself with better and better intelligence. And so quickly we progress through this small band of human intelligence, and we now can see an intelligence or a machine working on itself with Einstein-level intelligence. And this process of machines getting better and better and improving with bigger and bigger leaps is known as an intelligence explosion. And that was a term first used by the mathematician I.J. Good back in the times of Alan Turing. Now, we could quickly get to a point where we don't understand what this intelligence is at all. In fact, getting to a level of general intelligence could be the last invention that humanity ever makes. Because after that point, machines then become better at inventing than us. And now this is what's known as a technological singularity. So what are the outcomes of this? Well, there's no real way to know what the impact of a superintelligence would be. But if we think about it in terms of intelligence and the definition of intelligence that's been around since the times of the Greeks and Aristotle, we consider ourselves intelligent to the extent that our actions are expected to achieve our objectives. And similarly, we can think of computer intelligence as to the extent that their actions allow them to achieve their objectives. So we can think of this as an optimization process. And it's trying to achieve a state in that its objective is maximized. And so a superintelligence would just be really, really good at maximizing its objective. So we have a really powerful optimization process for X. Well, we better make sure that X incorporates everything that we really care about. Now, what we could think about this as is like a King Midas problem. For those of you who don't know the story about King Midas, he was a king who was granted a wish whereby everything that he touched would turn to gold. Now, this didn't really align with what he actually wanted, because it ended up being that he turned both his daughter and all the food that he wanted to eat into gold as well. And this presents us with the kind of issue that there could be serious risk in a seemingly harmless objective. One thought experiment about this is called the paperclip maximizer. Now, if we consider a super artificial intelligence whose only objective it is to maximize the number of paperclips in the world, well, very quickly, this super intelligence would realize that humans are getting in the way of its goal. Firstly, humans could turn it off, and they're also using steel for lots of other things, which means that they can't use it for paperclips. So we now have this super intelligent entity working towards a world where there's loads of paperclips and no humans. Obviously, this is a bit of a silly example, but what I'm trying to press to you is this idea that it could be a real serious risk of having a very powerful optimization process and not thinking about what the objectives are. But equally, our intelligence is what has got us to this point today, and our civilization has come down to the fact that we are far more intelligent than the other species around us. So having more intelligence could allow us to solve a lot of the problems that we haven't been able to solve yet. A lot of the problems that we've been talking about in these lectures over the last few weeks. Or this could be our worst nightmare. So how do we go about creating safe AI? We want AI that has our objectives and not its own. So can we create motivation structures that seek our values? I mean, that's a pretty complicated thing in itself, considering humans don't even agree on what our values are. And as Topaz was saying, sometimes we're not even rational. But what we need to do is steer away from this idea of a fixed objective. So researchers have come up with 3 principles for beneficial machines. The first of these is that the machine's only objective is to optimize or maximize the realization of human preferences. The second is that these preferences are initially uncertain. And those of you who are taking machine learning with Carl will know that that uncertainty is really important, because it will then keep seeking what those preferences are. And finally, that the ultimate source of information is human behavior. Now, hopefully machines designed this way will refer to humans. They will allow themselves to be turned off. They will proceed cautiously. Now, obviously, these are just principles at this stage, and there is a lot of research required for us to actually get to a point where we can prove that this is safe. And we really don't know how long that's going to take. But to add to the pressing nature of this point, due to the intelligence explosion, it's likely that the first machine to reach this level of general intelligence is going to be the only one that ever does it, because then it will just fly off beyond anything else. So there's clearly a serious challenge in getting to this level of general intelligence, but it's even harder to create it safely. So we only have one shot at getting this right. Now, other than the kind of principles I talked about, there are a few other proposals of how to deal with this super intelligent AI. One of them is this metaphorical black box, where essentially you would have an oracle AI that wasn't connected to the outside world. It would just be able to you would be able to communicate with it and ask the AI questions, and then the humans would put that action into practice. However, the problem with this is that a superintelligence would always be motivated to find more computational resources and power. So it has a motivation there to break out. And considering we've never been able to make a firewall that can keep humans out, it seems unlikely we'll be able to do it against a superpower. And then Elon's latest crazy idea is to combine us with AI using a machine-computer interface. Now, I don't know about you, but I quite like that to be proven safe before that becomes a reality. So, artificial intelligence, is it for good or ill? Well, it all comes down to whether we can align it to our human desires. If these risks are mitigated, then we're going to see no benefit of this technology. And if it's the last invention that humans ever made, then we better make sure that it's good. Thank you. Any questions? Isaac?
Do you think the arms race to develop general purpose AI will kind of overthrow the need to do it safely?
It's definitely a serious risk, both with from a dangerous point of view, like we're worried that someone else, the superpowers are probably more concerned with the fact they would be able to use this in a military way, for example. But there's also technologically, the first one to get this will obviously benefit massively from the money. So all sides of trying to get to this are essentially if you get there first without considering safety, it would benefit you. But then, as a whole, humanity, it's not really going to be safe. So it's definitely a concern. And the whole reason that I'm basically talking about this is that we need to basically raise the awareness that this safety is really important, and racing towards this blindly is a serious concern. In terms of how do we stop China racing ahead without considering the safety of it, that's a pretty good question that I don't really know the answer to, and it is a worry. But there are initiatives, for example, that a lot of the biggest corporations signed up to that essentially look to seek safe artificial intelligence, and there are also research outfits that publish a lot of their papers to ensure that no sort of single research group gets too far ahead of the other, because it would be worrying if they sort of get to a point and then manage to accelerate ahead. So that's trying to level the field, but it is definitely a concern.
So one of the things that people have said is a quality for humans is creativity, and I'm a bit more interested on what you think of that, because ultimately the way I see AI is, you use the word understand.
Yeah.
I like to think of it more as they get given an input and that's what they understand. They
And
don't
it's
actually
pattern
understand behind
recognition.
it. Therefore, can they make the further connections to be creative? Or is that beyond what you think is the realm of it?
Well, so I don't know if you heard about this thing called AlphaGo, but it was Google basically, well, it was a company called DeepMind that Google then acquired. But DeepMind essentially managed to beat the world champion at this game called Go. And Go it was kind of the next step on from chess, and it has far more different permutations. And what they first did is they basically learned by watching the best player play Go, and then learning how they do that and play against it lots and lots and lots. But then they started developing an algorithm that essentially just takes the basic principles of Go, and it just starts playing against itself, and it just optimizes essentially winning. So as long as it has the rules and winning, then it will just keep essentially learning new ways of playing Go that even humans didn't come up with. And I don't know about you, but like creativity for me is essentially taking different realms and combining them to create new ideas, essentially. So where I know what you're saying about essentially, is this just clever pattern recognition? But actually, if you have AI that is coming up with, I mean, Go is a simple example, but coming up with new ways of essentially being humans that humans have never thought of, then that to me seems more in the realms of creativity. And that's been expanded now into like even some of the best kind of strategy games, like online strategy games, which obviously have a lot more different levels of abstraction. And obviously there's another step to then get to the world level, but creativity is kind of like, the definition of it can be debated, but it's definitely possible to come up with solutions that computers can come up with solutions that humans have never done. So with this reinforcement learning, like I was talking about, where Google is finding new architecture, essentially AI architecture, it's using this reinforcement learning, and that's a technique of artificial intelligence where you just give it its goal and all the rules around it, and then it can find different ways to do it. So you might have seen simulations of like evolution where you can just put in some rules about gravity essentially, and put in some muscles and nodes, and you just hit play, and essentially it will just try lots and lots of different stuff, and the stuff that it likes, it will make it more likely for it to try that again. And so quickly you then start seeing essentially this like animal start to evolve, and all that's doing is from the objective of getting from point A to point B, and a few sort of physical rules about what's possible. And then it starts coming up with things that you wouldn't even consider as a human. I hope that kind of answers the point of creativity.
I have another question on the background.
Go on.
It's kind of philosophical, but I guess one thing about my interpretation of creativity is it's essentially there's no point to it. You just kind of do it because you enjoy it. Like music, does it really have much point? Sport, does it have much point? Do you think AI would ever get to that stage, and is that what then makes it conscious or whatever?
Sure, that could be what makes us human, but does that make us intelligent? I mean, it's a philosophical question, and actually I think as we start researching AI more, one of the sort of bases of this research is I'm trying to understand our brain more, because that's the thing that we are basically modelling, that can think across things in different areas rather than just one narrow area. So we might find that actually, to be generally intelligent does incorporate those things, or it might be that that's a human thing, and we don't need that to necessarily be intelligent, and therefore create all of these problems that we might see with a superintelligence. Yes.
So how could one tell when when you've reached that tipping point? And once you've created a machine that has gone past, that has surpassed all human intelligence, should you just trust everything it says?
So how would you know, seems to be the first part of the question. Well, it's kind of hard because, as the general public, we probably won't, because you kind of hear about these, sudden big bursts of AI suddenly pushing far further forward, for example, AlphaGo. But actually, researchers have been working on that technology for a number of years, so it's hard for us to know, when that's going to happen. Probably it will just happen. But the fact is that researchers will probably know when they're starting to get closer and closer. There are significant barriers that when they start overcoming, for example, being able to think hierarchically. So as humans, we don't, if you think about, all right, I'm going to go to the airport now, we don't think about every possibility that we could, I don't think about like walking and all of the different combinations. We kind of hierarchically think, okay, I need to go to the airport, okay, so I'm going to need a car. And then you start narrowing that down. So we don't really have a concept for that in artificial intelligence yet, but those sort of barriers, once researchers start breaking those down, then I guess we will start to know whether we're getting closer. So there are a few milestones. And then, what was the second part of the question?
So once it's surpassed human intelligence, should we just trust it?
Well, I think it's very hard for us to know what superintelligence even means. So it's kind of hard to say that. I think a superintelligence would just have an unprecedented change on humanity, and I think the world as we know it would be completely different. So trying to understand whether we would trust it or not, I don't really know. I feel like it would be such a big change to what we know that might not even be relevant. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much.